Welcome to Finding Your Inner Mr. Rogers. I'm Todd Faber, and I believe that in a world of noise and speed, the most radical thing we can be is kind. We often think of leadership as being in charge, but Fred Rogers taught us that true leadership is about being in service to the dignity of others. Today, we're joined by Shaheer Mustafa. As president and CEO of HopeWell, Shaheer leads one of the most innovative social agencies in New England, specifically focused on the foster care system. His work is the modern-day embodiment of Fred Rogers' advocacy for the forgotten child. He isn't just managing a nonprofit, he's redesigning a system to ensure that children in transition have a neighborhood to call home. Shaheer is a visionary leader in the field of child welfare and social services. And as president of HopeWell, he's dedicated to transforming the lives of children and young adults in the foster care system by creating innovative, person-centered models of care. With a background in clinical social work and a deep commitment to social justice, Shaheer leads with the belief that every child deserves a stable, loving neighborhood in which to grow. He's a champion for the vulnerable and a leader who proves that systematic change begins with a single, compassionate connection. Welcome to the neighborhood, Shaheer.
Well, thanks, Todd. Great to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled you're here, and you and I have known each other for a long time, and I've worked with you. I absolutely love HopeWell. You know my own background. I was a guardian ad litem and a child abuse prosecutor. So I have a very, very, very deep appreciation for all the work you guys do on behalf of kids. So thank you for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it.
So we'll jump right in. Fred Rogers famously said that hoping is a very powerful thing. However, for children in foster care, we know that hope can be very fragile. So how do you lead an organization to provide not just beds and services, but kind of a sense of a permanent, reliable hope for kids who feel like the world has forgotten them?
Well, I think it really starts with what we call our core theory. And, I don't know how much your listeners are familiar with just our child welfare system, so I'm not going to get into all the nitty-gritty details, but at the highest level, the way that our child welfare system is currently structured and set up, we have a fundamental issue with the goals that it prioritizes. So the way that child welfare establishes its goals is that it's really focused on safety and the removal of conditions that might lead to abuse or neglect. But what we know is that the downstream effects of child welfare involvement result in some of the most catastrophic outcomes for kids and families. And so kids experiencing the foster care system are our nation's most marginalized group of young people, and the data very consistently bears this out. So when a young person ages out of our foster care system, about 40% of them will experience homelessness within 1 year of exiting care. About half will have an unplanned pregnancy, often leading to involvement in the child welfare system for them and their child. The median income for somebody exiting foster care is about $9,000 a year, which is obviously far below the federal poverty line. Only about 3% of people who exit the foster care system will obtain a post-secondary degree, compared to about 50% of their non-foster peers. And perhaps most striking, 82% of males who have any contact with the child welfare system at any point, by the time they're 26, 82% will be arrested, incarcerated, on probation, or parole.
Yeah.
So when you look at those outcomes, and these are the outcomes of a system that has removed a child from an unsafe situation, but these are the outcomes that the system is achieving. So on the one hand, it's done its job, right? It's taken that child out of an unsafe situation. But if we think about those long-term effects, we would say that that system has been an abject failure on behalf of those kids.
I would agree.
So I think we start with that, which is our child welfare system is measuring the wrong thing, and it's focused on the wrong thing. Safety is important, but it's not enough. You're a parent, I'm a parent, I have 2 kids. If somebody said to you, Todd, and to your wife, like, is your job as a parent to simply make sure that your kids are safe, free from abuse and neglect? You would obviously answer no. That's an incomplete answer. Like, you have a responsibility to ensure that they are thriving, that they're not only surviving, but they're thriving, and that they launch into adulthood prepared to be successful and have all the opportunities before them that any child should have. And the way that our child welfare system is structured and established, that's just not the case. So it's just important, I think, to lead with that, these are obvious things that I'm pointing out. So I just want to name
Right.
that as well. Like, this isn't some breakthrough idea. Like, a lot of people know this and think this. I think what we try to do is we say, okay, that knowledge is not enough. Now we need to actually do something to address the way that our system is structured so that it can have more equitable outcomes on behalf of those kids. So, but on a more granular level, like when kids come into foster care, into a HopeWell foster home, I think it's really important that we don't make promises to kids that we can't keep.
Of course.
So when we think about hope, a lot of children that enter the foster care, I mean, they've been let down by the adults in their life. Like, that's just the reality. They still love their parents, and I'm not trying to bad talk their parents, but their
No, of
parents
course
have
not.
effectively let them down on some level. That's just a fact. And so, understandably, they're wary of adults, these kids, and especially ones that are not related to them. So it's really important that we're honest with them and we are clear with them about what we can do and what we can't do. So yes, we can create an environment where they're safe and they're free from abuse and neglect, but also that they can begin to pursue like their interests in ways that perhaps they haven't had an opportunity to do so before. Um, so that's really important. We're also honest with them about the goals, right? Like, if the goal is to get them back to their family, then we want to be clear with them that this is a temporary place for them. It's not designed to be a permanent place for them. That being said, in some circumstances, it is potentially a permanent place. And so we also have to be honest with them about that. And then the last thing that I would say is that one thing that I've learned in doing this work is, kids are incredibly resilient. And despite really hard circumstances, it's amazing how much they can recover from and rebound from. And so we always remember that. But as adults in their lives, we do have to make sure that we are consistent, that we're loving, and we're providing homes that allow them that opportunity to grow and thrive.
I think that's wonderful. And again, I was doing that work 30 plus years ago. But I do like the idea that you're providing them those opportunities to thrive. Because to your point, that is part of what us as adults need to do for children. And the fact that the foster care system was designed, to keep them safe, which is obviously important, but that's clearly not enough. The problem is that the system as a whole is sort of seen as kind of like a machine, right? And Fred Rogers never really liked that idea of things being like a machine, right? That he preferred to see people as individuals. And I think to your point about getting kids to thrive, you have to sort of treat them that way. But given all those obstacles that you face as providers, how do you really execute on that idea of maintaining these kids, the dignity of these kids, and that concept of a unique oneness when you're trying to navigate the caseloads and all the bureaucracy that you face in the state? I mean, I know that you had at one point worked for the state. So how is it that you and your role and your social workers advocate to keep that sense of oneness and help those kids thrive?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think, just like anything, the more proximate you are to the work you're doing, the more likely you are to feel like emotionally connected to it and to see every person as the individual that they are. The further you get removed from it, the more it can become like an abstraction, And so you mentioned I used to work at DCF. I was an area director there for about 6 years. And, it would not be uncommon to walk in the morning and that the hotline removed maybe three siblings who had a parent who overdosed the night before. And those three kids are sitting in our lobby and they're young, 3, 5, 7 years old. And everybody in the office has walked by those kids, sees those kids, and feels a sense of urgency to find a safe place for those kids, right? Like, that's when the system is really at its best.
Right.
But across the way, on the other side of the waiting room or the lobby, there's a 17-year-old with a hood pulled over his head, slouched in the corner. And that kid also was picked up on the hotline. He ran away from his group home. He was smoking weed. He was probably, doing some things he probably shouldn't have been. And that kid gets some attention, but doesn't get quite as much attention as those three young ones. And to me, that kind of embodies some of the challenge, right? Of the way that our system just prioritizes that safety, but doesn't think about what's going to happen later down the road. Because that 17-year-old, he was in that same exact seat probably 10 years ago, right? So the more that we can get connected to the real personal nature of the work, that's critically important. And so what we try to do, to the extent that we can, is we really try to get to know each child. So when they come into our care, we get all sorts of information from them, from DCF, from previous placements, whatever it may be. And sometimes we don't get much at all because this might be one of their very first placements and nobody within the system really knows this child. So then it's on us to make sure that we do get to know them. Again, just to use the analogy of like your own kids, right? Like I have two boys, they're very different. I can tell you in incredible minute detail the differences between them, right?
Same
And
with me.
so exactly, right? But when a kid comes into care, who is holding that level of knowledge of them, right? Outside of their biological family. So sometimes we will go to the biological family. That's an option so that we can get to know them. But the whole point is we really need to understand them. What are their interests? What are the things that they're scared of? What are the things that, might give them pause coming into a new environment? The things that comfort them. The degree to which we can get to know them is only going to be beneficial for our capacity to support their ability to grow and thrive. And the other thing to know too is that it's a moving target, right? Like, so, kids are developing always. So when you think you get to know them, that can shift and change over time. So we also can't have a fixed mindset like, oh, we know this kid and this is how they are, right? Things evolve and change as they spend time or they're exposed to different environments. And so it's really important that we maintain kind of an open-mindedness and a learning stance for all the kids that we work with.
I think that's great because, again, going back to how do you help them thrive, and keeping that individuality is hugely important so they feel heard and listened to. But sort of taking that a step further in terms of the work that you guys do, Mr. Rogers is famously known for talking about telling people to find the helpers. You have a lot of helpers, obviously, on your staff and that you work with. They're on the front lines, as you once were, working with trauma and loss and this family separation every day. So as a leader who can be empathetic and compassionate and kind to the children, but also to your staff, how do you use sort of a Mr. Rogers type approach to care for those helpers, for your social workers, so that their passion for what they do doesn't get lost to some sort of secondary trauma?
Yeah, I mean, this is really important, and this can be pretty insidious. It can happen, and it can kind of capture you without you really even knowing. I speak about that firsthand. So secondary trauma is very real. I also think that we do need to draw a distinction between like the primary trauma and the secondary trauma. So like, just to name that, right? Like they're not the same. And so what I try to think about and I try to support and reinforce with our teams is that think about what the experience is for that young child, right? Like that's primary trauma, like what they're going through. And yes, our observation of it, our witnessing of it, our kind of standing with them has an effect on us as well, but imagine what that's like for that young person. So I think that helps give a little bit of stamina, but at the
Yeah.
same time, that can also cut both ways because then you just shut yourself off and you're always thinking about the other person and not necessarily taking care of yourself. So what we try to do again at our organization is it's really about organizational culture. And this is, we fail at this. We're not perfect at it, but I do think we certainly make a conscious effort to build out a culture that does reinforce a culture of well-being, a culture of appreciation, where people are taking care of themselves. It's I mean, it's so cliche that you hear you got to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can take care of somebody else, but it's true. It's true. And so we're fortunate enough that we have an incredible human resources and program team that are constantly doing different initiatives and programming to support our staff. So, and we kind of look at it as like a buffet style. Like it's not, some people may not like chicken salad, some people may, right? Like it's not, every offering may not be for you, but we hope that we offer enough that you can sample the things that work for you and that you are kind of nurturing yourself and taking care of yourself. So those are things like, we do like paint nights, we have a thing called a healthy me where we incentivize people who are like working out and taking care of their physical body. we do 10-year celebrations where we acknowledge and celebrate the amount of time people have spent in the organization. We do big celebrations and gifts and all sorts of acknowledgement and recognition for that. And then we also do a lot of mission moments. We intentionally call out like a kid who had a successful adoption, or every May, June, step up ceremonies, graduation ceremonies, where we're just acknowledging the milestones that the young people are achieving and the role that we played and helped make that possible. I think that's another thing too, is like, I'm a social worker. Most of the people in my organization are social workers. And we don't like to kind of acknowledge the work that we do. We feel like it's somehow like braggadocious or something, but it's important to acknowledge like, no, you helped make a difference in that child's life. Like those are just facts, and we should appreciate and acknowledge that. And I think that goes a long way for people feeling sustained. And this work's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So
Right.
you got to take care of yourself.
No, I think that's a wonderful culture that you set up, because I saw it firsthand too, in Miami, and you see people get burned out. You see people try to compartmentalize their discomfort with things in order to kind of move forward in a different direction. But to your point, when you do things like that, you have a tendency to neglect yourself in the true sense. And then at the end of the day, your work is going to suffer too, right? You're not going to be thinking things through the way you should, because you're not operating at full capacity. So the fact that you guys are able to do all those different things and treat, and I think to your point, you talked about having a paint night, or highlighting people that take care of their own well-being physically. That's that idea that you're implementing with the kids too, in terms of getting children to thrive, is finding their individuality. And I think you seems to be doing the same thing with your staff. And that's a wonderful testament to you as a leader to be able to do that. And I think it sort of leads to sort of my next question around being there as a leader, providing sort of that sense of consistency in the lives of your staff, who then provide it in the lives of the kids that they're working with. You think about how when you put a kid into care and they do move around a lot, you're eliminating the consistency from their lives. How do you guys offset that lack of stability by creating somewhat of a stable presence in their lives when those kids unfortunately move from home to home? Because I'm sure there's a huge percentage of kids that are not being taken into care and staying where they are until they either go home or they age out, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I would say this really happens primarily through our foster parents. Like, and so I just can't say enough about, I mean, our work is impossible without them. They're the most incredible people I've ever met. And people who say, like, oh, they do it for the money, or they do it for, like,
There's
I
not
would
enough
challenge
money in it.
anybody who says that. Like, I've been doing this work for 25 years. Like, there's probably one hand I can count where that may have been the primary driver for people. The vast
Right.
majority of them, that is the last thing they're thinking about. And quite honestly, if that's your racket, you better come up with a new one, because you end up spending more money than you bring in. Trust me on
Yeah.
that. Um, so our foster parents are heroes. They really truly are. And each one of them goes about this a little differently, but I would say each one of them holds that idea that consistency is key, especially, when young people are experience the amount of like disruption that they've experienced, being removed from their homes, often removed from their communities, everything that they know. Consistency is really, really, really important. And so that's everything from like routines, and like what we traditionally think of consistency. But there are more like we can't manualize every situation, right? Like there's just too many permutations of what could happen. So what we try to do is stick to our core values. Because if we're consistent with our core values, then we're going to generally have a pretty consistent approach to just about everything that we do, whether it's a problem that we're solving, a new program that we're developing, how we're interacting with our foster parents, how we're interacting with each other, with the young people that we serve and support. So our four core values are strengths, learning, empathy, and integrity. And, we don't need to get into all the details. I think they're pretty self-evident what those mean,
Yes.
but, we really try to practice those at every point when we're making a decision and kind of run it through the filter of like, are we operating from a strengths-based perspective? Is there something here we don't know that we might need to learn or account for? Are we having integrity in our decision making? Are we doing what we say we do? And are we centering the pain and suffering of the people that we're serving and having empathy for their circumstance? Like if we're doing those things and we're doing that consistently, then people get that and people see that, and then you start to develop trust as like a reliable partner.
So it's really a combination of things, I guess, in terms of, but making sure that that process stays consistent throughout when you're trying to focus on the well-being of the kids. It's fascinating because so much has changed in in the 30 years that I've been on the front line, and I often found myself or others again sort of focusing on the let's keep the kids safe, let's get them out, but then what happens? Oh well, now those kids are kind of at risk because they're in the system, and that is sort of a negative connotation in terms of how, even if we try very hard to say, oh, no, no, we're trying to focus on positive things, when you use that kind of language. And I know that you have spoken in the past about how we need to shift that, right? How we need to use different kind of language around how we view children. And Fred Rogers was really good about not labeling a kid at risk or labeling a kid in any kind of way other than seeing potential. So changing that, and I know you guys have done this, changing that vocabulary from the concept of at risk to at promise. How does that change how you guys approach situations and the impact it has on the kids who kind of see and hear that language in court when they're in court, when they're dealing with things? I mean, I'd like to think it has a positive impact, but I'm curious as to your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I have learned a lot about this by talking to people who have lived experience in foster care. So this is like, I don't have that personal experience. Like I've worked within this system, I've worked outside this system. I think I have like a degree of content knowledge as a result of that. We've been foster parents, like I have a bit of a lens from that viewpoint, but I've not experienced the child welfare system firsthand as like a participant in that system. So, but we have board members, members of our executive team, our staff team, and other people I've come into contact with over the years who have. And pretty consistently, what they say is using person first language is really, really important. So it sounds, maybe a little arbitrary, but we don't say foster kid or foster child, because that kind of puts the label of foster first, as opposed to, that they're a child first, they're a person first. So we say a child experiencing foster care, because it's the whole idea is that this is temporary. This does not embody like who you are as a person, because inevitably, and again, this comes from, I was a therapist for a number of years, so I heard this directly from kids that I worked with, but also with adults who've had this experience, who've, continued to educate me, is that the experience of foster care can have a very deep effect on like your personhood and your own sense of identity. And the internal shame that is often developed as a result, like I blaming myself for my circumstance. Like if I had just been XYZ, maybe I wouldn't have come into foster care, or maybe my parents could have done a better job, right? And we displace, some of the experience and kind of like take it and own it. And that's can be really harmful and hurtful over time. And so the degree to which we can separate people from their circumstances, it just creates like a mental map, and a bit of accountability just for how we think about and how we talk about the challenges. That people are not the problem. The problem is the problem. And that we separate those things so that people can have a little bit of distance and then they can kind of observe it, and not be kind of consumed by it.
Or defined by it, really, right?
That's
I mean,
right.
that's one
Yeah.
of the key is that when we do label children, especially, they take that with them. And that, to your point, does so much more harm than we could possibly imagine. unless we've experienced it ourselves and see it firsthand, because you never know. As much as you might work in the system, as hard as you work in the system, as much good as you do, you can never truly appreciate the experience that that child has because you're not in their shoes. And to turn around as a third party and try to define that experience for them also is detrimental. So I love the fact that you guys sort of have separated the individual from the experience so as to not define them, so they can themselves be separate from it and grow. And it's
Yeah, one thing
amazing.
that I would just add to that too, like, I mean, I can't tell you how many times this has happened, like for real, where whether it's a speaking engagement, an event, something where I'm talking to a group of people where you would just presume like nobody in the audience has had that experience, or it would be easy to not be thinking that somebody in this room full of, let's say, 100 executives at a Fortune 100 company, for example, and somebody will come up to me inevitably afterwards and say, I've never told anybody this, but I was in foster care. Or, like I can't tell you how common that is. People just don't talk about it because it's not an outward expression of an experience, right? Like I'm a person of color. There are affinity groups for whatever racial identity, for, LGBTQ folks oftentimes, gender affinity groups. Like you see that. It's like a
Right.
phenotype. It's often very apparent, but you have no idea who's experienced foster care. Like you just don't, you know what I mean? And it's something that people don't really talk about. They carry a deep, deep shame oftentimes about that
Yes.
experience. So the degree to which we can like surface that and let people see that there are many people who've had this experience and it doesn't define them can be incredibly liberating.
Uh, yeah. I mean, I have over the years had those conversations every once in a while, but I can tell you that if you're having those conversations relatively regularly with people, that's a testament to you, because they're clearly feeling comfortable talking about something that they're not comfortable talking about. I was one of the folks that I interviewed last week on the podcast is a biologist and a psychologist, and we talked a lot about the fight or flight mentality with stress and the physiological impact it has on your nervous system, and that we will close ourselves off when we're uncomfortable talking about something. And I can't imagine there's many things that somebody would feel as uncomfortable about as talking about being in foster care, because to your point, they feel that shame, and it's deep, because they often question, why was I there? What did I do wrong? How did I fail my parents? And the fact that they felt so comfortable at an age where they were successful, but they were still feeling that shame to talk to you is, again, I mean, kudos, Shahir, because that's huge, because most people do not open up like that. Um, and I think that that's, if more of us can make people feel comfortable, and that comes down to being compassionate and showing kindness and showing empathy, all the things that this podcast is about for leaders, all the things that Fred Rogers was about. So I think it's great that you were able to help them express that in a way that they hadn't before. So if we need to find more people like you to do that. And speaking of which, Fred Rogers, I read this years ago, talked a lot about that anybody that does something to kind of help a child in their life, he considers a hero. And obviously, you've done a lot, which is wonderful. But in all your years in HopeWell and then with the state, with DCF, was there anybody that really stands out to you who's sort of like that quiet hero, whether it's a foster parent or somebody that went through the system themselves, or even a child, who taught you what leadership is really like when nobody's watching, right? That's the quiet hero mentality. It's doing the right thing when nobody's looking.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is an easy one for me. I mean, I can rattle off any number of people I've been fortunate enough to cross paths with in my journey. So there's a foster parent. Her name's Myra. And she's been with us for, I might get some of these details wrong, but I'm pretty sure she's been with us for like at least 30 years.
That's okay. I'll make sure I send this to her and then she can correct you.
We could fact check. Yeah. So I think I want to say she's in Worcester. I believe that's where she is. And she's been doing this for 30 years. She's fostered dozens of kids. And if you meet Myra, she's just like the most lovely, sweet, kind-hearted person. She's always bringing gifts. So whenever we do what we always do, May is Foster Care Awareness Month. So we always do appreciation events in May. We do them throughout the year, but we always make sure to do them. And whenever we whenever we go to celebrate her, she of course has gifts for everybody else. So that's just the kind of person that Myra is. And I got to hear the story of her son, who initially came to her experiencing foster care. She took him in, and he had some pretty horrific trauma. I'm not going to like kind of get into all of that, but I've been doing this for a long time. I've pretty much seen and heard it all. This kid's story is like one of the worst I've heard. It's pretty rough. And so he came in, and she just created such a loving environment for him to heal, which is just what he needed. And so he stayed with her for a number of years, and he didn't have any family that he could go to who was willing to take him in. And so she decided to adopt him. And so, she refers to him as her son, of course. And, now he's a young adult and he's doing really well and he's on his own and he's working. And, so she didn't know at the time, but we had her speak at an event. And so she's telling the story of, her and her son. And then her son had pre-recorded a video on Zoom where he basically just acknowledged like all she had done for him.
Right.
I'm gonna get emotional just thinking about it, but like there was not a dry eye.
That's okay.
Like he told her just how much like she basically saved his life and like what she meant for him. And so she's crying, he's crying, everybody's crying. And so it was just a beautiful, beautiful, to me, an example of like, yes, this is somebody who like she does it without fanfare. She does it without recognition. We try to recognize her, we do, but like that's not why she does it. She does it because she has an open heart. And I would argue like a calling, like this is not, being a foster parent is not for everybody. Like it's just not like, you don't get to shut yourself off. I mean, you're opening your home, you're welcoming in a child who oftentimes has had a real bad hand dealt to them and is not always going to show you love and respect. And you got to hang in there with them and love them through it and ride that wave. And she's done that so many times. And it's just incredible. It's inspiring. It's like, as long as there's people like that who are willing to do that, like my job is easy. So Myra's who I think about.
Well, she clearly sounds like a wonderful person. I would beg to differ that your job is not easy. There is a lot that goes into the work that you guys do. And the key to success is ensuring that the boots on the ground are being cared for as well. And it's clear to me that in your leadership role there you've been there, what, about 8 years now, I think, something like that?
10, yeah.
10, okay. God, time flies, my goodness.
It
That's when we
does.
met.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even, my oldest wasn't even driving.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
And of course, now my youngest just graduated college the other day. It is a testament to you, which is one of the reasons I identified you as somebody I would love to have on this, because leadership comes in all shapes and sizes. Leadership in a corporate environment or state government or nonprofit all comes with its challenges. But it's incrementally more challenging when the people you're working with have to maintain a sense of mission and passion so that they can do their job the best way possible. And clearly at HopeWell now you have a well-oiled organization that is not just encouraging people to do their best, but supporting them to do their best, in the sense that you have all these systems in place, like you talked about with your HR program. And it's wonderful. And we need more Myras for sure, but we need more of you as well. And so thank you for all the work you've done, for all the kids that I saw in foster care, back in Miami in the '90s and since. Your work is so appreciated by so many, and I want to thank you for that and for coming on today. Um, and for those of you watching, HopeWell is a wonderful organization. They're all over Massachusetts. You can feel free to reach out directly to them. I'll put the link in this. But they can always use external support as well. So thanks again, Shaheer, for joining me, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Todd, for having me. Appreciate the kind words.
Take care.
All right. See ya.